week and ready to bring back Sam once again. First off, Sam, well, we talked during the commercial break about just the overall the busyness, so to speak, of a sports department this time of year. You came in fresh right there after the Georgia game, or right in Georgia week. Now that you've had a few weeks to kind of digest everything, how's everything been?
Yeah, going good up here in Knoxville. I think if you had told a lot of Vol fans coming into the season, hey, you'll be 4-1
Mm-hmm.
coming out of the bye week. Your only loss is an overtime loss to Georgia. I feel like most Vol fans would be pretty happy about that. Of course, looking back and seeing how close they were to winning that game, they now getting a little greedy and going, man, we should be 5-0
Yeah,
right now.
absolutely.
But as far as all things considered, I think if you can get through this game with Arkansas this week, if you can pick up one more at home against that very turbulent Arkansas team right now, and then go into Bama 5-1, you're right where you want to be. You're still right in contention. Obviously, that you're the 12th team in the country right now, clearly in the playoff mix.
Mm-hmm.
So all things considered, you're happy with so many unknowns coming into this season. The Vol fans really had no idea what to expect. A couple months ago, we didn't know who the quarterback was going to be, and
Right,
now,
right.
okay, Joey for Heisman. So all things considered, I think Vol fans are quite happy up here.
No question about it. I had to go back and make sure and just check because I thought Tennessee was the number one scoring offense in the country. I didn't know if the bye week if anybody had slid on top of them, but no, 51 points per game, still the number one scoring offense. After the bye week, what's been the message for this team, and where do you see this offense going? Obviously, it's prolific, it's high scoring, but where do you see this momentum flowing as they go back into the second half of the season?
No, absolutely. I think, even with them being the number one scoring offense, in the country, they still feel like there's work to be done. That's something that they've continually talked about is we still got a lot of work to do, and offensive coordinator spoke today and was talking about Joey Aguilar and we've seen more interceptions pile up over the last couple of weeks, but they're saying that's okay with us. We're entirely okay with that as long as Joey continues to pull the trigger, because as long as he's throwing the trigger, he's got guys that are going to go make plays for him. Braylon Staley, obviously Chris Brazzell, all those guys that are able to make him, look even better than he already is. So I think they're continuing to say, hey, forget that, the first couple of weeks of the season you had no interceptions and now you have 5 since the Georgia game.
Mm-hmm.
We don't care about that number. As long as you're continuing to say, I'm not scared to throw the football, that's where they want him to be. So right now, that's the message is, we don't care if we get down a couple scores. We don't care if we're up a couple scores. Keep your foot on the pedal. We don't want this to be a shootout. We want this to be a blowout. So that's where the Vols offense is heading into Arkansas this week. And I think their balanced attack too. I think with the three-headed running back monster, I think they're continuing to say we don't think that it's just Joey that's going to have to throw for 400
Right, right,
yards each
right.
game. We can do it in all facets of the game, and that's something that we're going to continue to do moving forward.
Sam, we talked last week about the Mississippi State game and that close win for Tennessee over them. Coming off the bye week, I know Josh Heupel talked about Arkansas a little bit. I mean, you look at the Razorbacks, they're kind of playing desperate at this point. Bobby Petrino taking over. Is there concern that there might be a letdown this week against them?
I think there's concern with the fans because the Vols fans are always concerned of a letdown coming their way. But I don't think that in the locker room, I don't think that in the coaching staff, they're concerned in the slightest this week. A lot of people, again, fans are saying, don't overlook, don't look at Alabama, look at Arkansas. But within the staff all week long during the bye week and, of course, heading into this week, they're saying, no, our full attention is on Arkansas this week. And on that, that new defensive staff, almost completely new defensive staff heading into this week. 3 defensive coaches fired. Sam Pittman, of course, fired. To check out what kind of system is going to be run on the defense, you might have to scout some UFL, some USFL coaching staff with those guys over here under Bobby Petrino. But they completely seem to be taking Arkansas with the full extent of seriousness. And I think a lot of that has to do with the guys on this team who went over to Fayetteville last year and experienced that upset loss when they were undefeated going into that game. So I think, the fans, of course, are going to feel the nerves, but I think the team has 100% focus on Arkansas, and that is the only thing they're concerned about right now. They're not concerned about the rankings. They're not concerned about going down to Tuscaloosa for a night game. They're not concerned if John Mateer is going to be healthy for a few weeks from now, when they come here. They're focused on Bobby Petrino and the Arkansas Razorbacks.
Absolutely. Obviously, Josh Heupel comes from a very, very strong line of quarterbacks that played at Oklahoma. And their tradition is so rich. I mean, you think of guys like Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray, all these guys that have won Heisman trophies and have had tremendous success in the NFL as well. Not necessarily stat padding, but do you see that if Heupel has a chance to give his quarterback maybe a couple of extra possessions, or a couple of extra yards, maybe some touchdowns, to be able to pad his resume, knowing how good he is overall, but just being able to give himself a chance to be up there with some of the guys that are those Heisman contenders? Do you see that from him as they move forward, or is it just more, hey, however we get it done? Because as you just mentioned, Tennessee does have a very balanced attack.
See, now the safe answer is going to be the Josh Heupel answer, which is, I'm going to say, we're doing things the right way. We're going to give you the most boring answer possible. But then when you see Josh Heupel in the locker room, like after that Mississippi State win, and you see him jumping up and down with his guys, when you see him, hyping up his players and everything, I think the message that we get from Coach Heupel is we don't care about the stats. We just care about the win. But for me personally, in my opinion, I think Coach Heupel is going to go, okay, yeah, I love the storyline of Joey Aguilar as a Heisman candidate. I love the storyline of Joey Aguilar as the passing leader in the SEC. Who's this guy over in Nashville, that everybody's talking about that's, 35 years old. We're focused on Joey Aguilar and him being the face of Tennessee football, especially when that former quarterback is now in the headlines over at UCLA this week. But that's all my answer. Yeah. I think if you ask Coach Heupel, he'd give you a much more dull answer to that exact question.
That's a really balanced answer. I really like it both because I can hear it from both sides, from your side, from Sam's side, as well as from Coach Josh Heupel's side. Meanwhile, on the other sideline, there will be a great quarterback in Taylon Green for the Arkansas Razorbacks. Before we get your thoughts, let's hear what Coach Heupel had to say about the Arkansas signal caller.
Yeah, you got to play gap sound. You got to get off the blocks, and then, he's dynamic. He's got great long speed, and you got to be able to tackle him. And so in the different structures that we're playing, our gap integrity is going to be important. When they're dropping back and throwing, you can't just let them sit back there and pat the ball either. You got to apply pressure, but you got to have great lane integrity as you're doing that. So those will all be points that will be really important for us defensively.
And we talked about the offense a lot with Tennessee, and it seems like the offense will never be able to keep this football team out of a ball game. But now that you're going up against Taylon Green, a really strong quarterback in the SEC, what is the challenge for this week's defense, and what are some of the ways that they're preparing for Taylon Green?
I think it's a big challenge for them. I think that's something that they've talked about all week is like, okay, they might be statistically near the bottom of the SEC in a lot of categories right now. They might not, have they might be 2-3 come to this game, but they also took Ole Miss down to the wire. That number 4 undefeated team in the country right now. That's the top of the SEC. That's the flagship program in the SEC. Ole Miss. Yeah, Arkansas took them down to the very last play at the beginning of the season. So I think there is a lot of focus on not just Arkansas as a whole, but can we stop this offense, and what are going to be the keys to stop this offense? Because right now, Taylon Green, he's a top 5 rusher in the SEC right now as a quarterback. He's the only quarterback, in the top 10 right now, and he's the number 1 rusher on their team. And that's something that, I even noticed in some of the, the games where Tennessee was in full control this season, like UAB, when a dual threat quarterback came in. That's something that Tennessee kind of struggled with because they're focused on getting to the quarterback, and when he's getting outside of the tackles, when he's getting outside of moving to the outside, that's when they're, okay, we got to get our defensive backs, our linebackers involved. And that's something that I think they're working on. And that's something that I think they know a whole lot more about than I do is, focusing on, okay, we got to have a guy spying this quarterback. We can't let him get loose. We can't have him rush for 100 yards here in Neyland Stadium in front of our fans. We just can't let that happen. So I think it is a big challenge, but I think it's one that they're up for. That's, we already talked about last week is, we weren't super impressed with the Vols defense against Mississippi State, but then they scored 2 touchdowns in that game. So, you got to forgive them of any blemishes that were in that performance. But I think, there's some guys starting to get healthy. They're really, Arion Carter, I mean, he's the class of the SEC right now, and the class of the country, really, as far as, someone that's just going to go out and get 15, 20 tackles a game. He's someone who I think is going to be pivotal. And all right, I can track down a guy like Taylor Green. He might be fast, but we're going to keep a good eye on them. So I think the Vols are up to the challenge. We'll have to see how it plays out on Saturday.
Absolutely. With every coach, there's always some tendencies, and you're always able to pick up small things that they like to do on 3rd and short and the first down when they have 2 timeouts, or just whatever the case is. Anytime there's a coaching change, though, every now and again you could find some small things that they haven't done in the previous years. What do you know, if anything, that they're trying to do maybe a little bit differently now that Bobby Petrino is the head coach, the guy calling timeouts, the guy calling personnel and everything else? Or do they expect to see a lot of similarities between what they've seen between week 1 and where we stand now with the Razorbacks?
I think the message here in Knoxville this week is, there's no such thing as too much preparation. They've been getting a lot of questions about that, the coaching staff, whether it's, the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, right up to Josh Heupel, even to the players, is there such thing as too much preparation? And they're saying absolutely not. We're looking into everything we can. We're going back and, watching 2010 Arkansas Razorbacks with Bobby Petrino and seeing, what is he going to possibly come out and try to throw into this system. And we, as fans of sports, you've seen so many times in the past when a coach gets fired, a team go, okay, we got to rally for this guy. We have to come out and play like our lives depend on it, because in this age of college football, your job could depend on it. When a new coach and staff comes in, you could be out of there, in the next season. So I think there will be some changes. And I think one thing that Coach Heupel has talked about is it might not be, we come in with their exact game plan, but we have to be prepared for anything that they throw at us. So that's something that they've continued to talk about here, is this might be our biggest game this year. And just during the game, we have to make these adjustments. And that's, if they throw something at us and they get a random score, we can't back down from that. We have to go, okay, what did they do here, and how do we adjust to that the next time? So I think this is a game where you could see a lot of, schematic changes in the second quarter, in the third quarter, depending on what's going your way, what's working, and what's not working.
Absolutely. The bye week came at a really good time, because the road ahead, let's just be honest, is tough. I mean, obviously, the Arkansas game, I think a lot of people expect the Vols to be able to get through that one relatively easily. But then it's a road trip to Alabama, and then later on, it is the Heupel going against Oklahoma once again. That was a lot made of last year. Obviously, this year will be in Knoxville. What do Tennessee fans make of what they've seen so far, and what is to come with a couple of huge ones in conference?
Absolutely. And like I said, I think they knew coming into this that 4-1, you're happy with that. You'd love to be 5-0, but you're happy with the 4-1. Now, you just cannot drop one of those, fringe games. You cannot drop an Arkansas. You cannot drop a Kentucky. You can't even come close to dropping one of those games, because Oklahoma coming to town, we're anticipating that John Mateer is going to be healthy by then. And, of course, Alabama starting to pick up some momentum in the SEC as, okay, maybe they are, maybe that week 1 matchup with Florida State was a fluke. I think Vol fans are very concerned about that Alabama and that Oklahoma game, but of course you got to take care of business with the Arkansas and the Kentuckys, and they feel like they should be able to take care of business in both of those games, but it's easier said than done. So we'll have to see how those play out. I will say there has been no announcement for that Oklahoma game yet, but the way that the schedule's lined up, you got to think that that's a night game here in Neyland Stadium. So you go Alabama and Oklahoma, in a 3-week stretch of night
Yeah.
games, probably on primetime TV.
Yep.
Yeah, that's some draining stuff right there over the next handful of weeks.
No question about it. But like you said, 1 foot forward, take care of Arkansas. I think that they get it done. And this time next week, we'll be talking about a big one against Alabama. Sam, so grateful for your time today here on Southeast Sports Plus.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you so much.